There's my $500,000 idea. You can have it.
Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Dan Maloney.
This is episode 284. This week we'll be talking about laser fault injection, console hacks, and too much audio. This week in the news, possible discovery of liquid water in Mars mid-crust by the InSight lander. This is really fun if you remember InSight, because you would have to remember. It got shut down in 2022 when too much dust had accumulated on the solar panels and they just couldn't transmit anymore. But the one thing that it did that was kind of special was seismometry. And I guess the number crunching has taken 2.5 years so far. But it looks like, based on some physics models and the data they got back, that there may be a bunch of water on Mars. And this is like, this has been the question. It looks like there's been erosion on Mars. It looks like there have been riverbeds. Where the heck is the water? At least the preliminary answer from this one seismographic survey from InSight is that it might be kind of 15 to 20 kilometers down underneath the Martian soil.
Yeah, I mean, good news, lots of water. Bad news is that's a really deep well to drill. And, it's not, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think you kind of need a manufacturing capability in place before you're going to drill a 10 kilometer or 15 kilometer deep well. So
it could be more accessible.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe there's some springs over on the, on the other side of the planet we haven't found, but I'm thinking probably not.
So, 10 to 15 to 20 kilometers. How deep is that, Elliot? And the answer is the Kola super deep borehole, the deepest hole we've ever drilled, is 12 kilometers deep. So,
wow.
Maybe actually, if super deep borehole is 12 kilometers and we need to go kind of 15 or 20 to get water on Mars, maybe.
But again, it's Russia, which has, an actual industrial capability. So you need pipe. You just order it. Sending pipe to Mars, kind of a difficult proposition now when we scrabble to send a couple of, grams here and there. And it's going to take a while. Settle down, everybody. We're not going to Mars tomorrow.
I think it was Total Recall where Arnold Schwarzenegger kickstarts the oxygen generators that melt the frozen water on Mars or something. I think this is actually out of Philip K. Dick science fiction story.
Yeah, Total Recall was Philip K. Dick, yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally now convinced that science fiction is all true.
It's all just predictions that haven't come true yet.
Exactly, right?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This is the strangest What's That Sound ever. So I'd like you to have a listen to it, and then I'll tell you and our listeners why
all right.
This is unique.
Okay, let's see.
Short?
Yeah, I'm not gonna get a t-shirt this week, that's for sure. I have no clue.
I gave this one to Al Williams, hoping he would know, because I know he is like an old computer aficionado. It's a startup chime from an SGI Indigo.
Really?
Which is a bit obscure, I'm willing to say.
That's a little obscure. I had an SGI, I think it was an O2, as a workstation in one of my previous jobs. So
that's pretty sweet.
But that's not one that I remember.
But Al's guess was like the startup sound from an Amiga in Brazil or something, which I thought was awesome. But so dang close, actually. I was really extraordinarily proud of him for coming up with that. But now on to why this is a unique What's That Sound? We got one answer, and it's wrong. So nobody got this one right at all. I stumped everybody. That really bums me out. I'm going to have to.
The other possibility, nobody was listening last week, except for one person.
So I actually went and checked the logs on the podcast because I was like, oh shit, did I fail to put the podcast out last week? And then I went to the website and I checked the post and, it links to the form and everything. I didn't screw that up. No. It was just that hard. And so, yeah, mea culpa, folks. I wonder if I should dig up the link where I got this from. It's actually really fun.
It does have a little bit of a salsa flair to it. I could see where Al came up with the Brazil thing. It sounds a little carnival,
There's an awesome collection of all old computer startup sounds over on Internet Archive.
Because of course there is.
I'll throw the link to this one in there, but there are a ton more so that you can cheat at a future Hackaday podcast. What's that sound? And we won't ever be in this situation again where nobody wins a t-shirt. That really bums me out. Yeah, so stay tuned for next week and we'll have another sound. I'll try to make it easier this time. All right, well, let's start up the hacks. This week I want to start with a hacky hack. This is kickflips and buffer slips, an exploit in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. This is work by Ryan. This is pretty incredible hacking work, actually. A lot of people who want to modify their old consoles in various ways, like I think one of the most popular ones is to get a save game working in old console games that didn't have, along the way saves. But, there's tons of other reasons you might want to get your own code on one of these old consoles. But what you need to do to get that, of course, is find a bug that's exploitable. And this is a new one found by Ryan in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater family. And he does a lot of work with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, but it apparently is a similar bug in a whole bunch of them. It's kind of a classic in a way. It's just a buffer overflow that gets them. They have a custom map editor, and with the editor, you can create gaps to jump over, right? So, you go from this rail to this wall or something, and you can name the gaps. And once you let people type in whatever they want, they'll do it. And so you type in a way too long string for the gap name, and you get a string copy and a buffer overflow, and the work continues from there. This actually wasn't super easy. In particular, he had a heap overflow, but not a stack overflow. And so he could have it call other functions in its own memory, but he couldn't necessarily get his arbitrary code into memory. And so he had to resort to return-oriented programming, which is where you call functions that are already defined in the program and kind of string them together and misuse them for your own purposes. So instead of writing your own code, you're saying, do this subroutine, do this subroutine, do this subroutine, and using existing code, basically. So he managed to put together a full exploit chain based on this for a bunch of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games. And what's super interesting about this is that it works on a whole bunch of different platforms, including, but not limited to, the Xbox, the PlayStation 2, and the GameCube, and also the PC version of these games. And what's really wild is that it works whenever you load this custom map. So you can send a friend this custom map and they can jailbreak their Xbox. Or you can invite someone to a LAN game and it will jailbreak their Xbox. And this is where it gets kind of dangerous / sketchy / horrible, is that because it also runs on the PC, if you're playing network games, it can run code in the background on your PC and do kind of all sorts of bad hacker things to you. And so while you may not care about, a hack on your Xbox, especially since it might let you add like a save game to some games you wanted to, unfortunately, the bad side effect of this could be that if you're playing networked Tony Hawk Pro Skater with some people you don't know who have shady intentions, you could be giving them arbitrary code execution on your PC computer.
It's like one of the weirdest vectors for an attack, right? Somewhere you don't really expect it, but then again, you probably should.
Yep.
You got a lot of exposure through games that you wouldn't expect. It's funny. I look at this one and I feel embarrassed at how proud I was of my first quote unquote hack of anything, really. It was, in the 1990s or something like that. I'm playing F-15 strike fighter, and I get bored with playing it, and I'm not making any progress. So I started looking at files, and I found a file that had some sort of suggestive name, like, stats or something like that. And I was like, oh, let's take a look at this. So I pulled it up in a hex editor, and I played the game a little bit, and then look back at the file and see, oh, what's different? Oh, that's different. I wonder what that byte does. And so eventually I found where it stored like your rank and your score and your level and all this stuff. And I figured out that was my first exposure to big endian and little endian. I had no idea why that would be a thing. Like, why is it putting, the bytes in the back in reverse order? I don't get that. Well, whatever. I figured it out, and I figured out how to play with that file and make myself whatever rank I wanted to. And I was so proud of that at the time. And then I look at something like this and I'm like, ooh, well, maybe I'm a little outclassed, but man, that was cool. It was a good feeling back in the day, trying to tweak that a little bit, and technically cheating, I suppose, but so.
Yeah. If you're only cheating yourself, it's really okay.
Exactly. And I'm learning. That was the important thing. I was learning.
Yeah, I had a friend who gave a course at my local hack space about kind of introduction to hacking, and he used old video games as a kind of an intro to it because A, they didn't have a lot of the fancy defenses that modern programs and operating systems do, but B, you can use MAME as an emulator and you can step through everything, and you've got like the best debugger ever when you've got MAME running, because the whole damn thing's emulated, right? So you can single step. You can say, what happens if I change this area of memory? What happens if I change this area of memory? You can graph everything out, which if it's a sprite-based game, you can see straight up where the sprites are and stuff.
Yeah.
Really just a super hacking platform. And I think that would be an awesome kind of general purpose introduction to how to exploit and hack software through old school video games emulated on MAME. It would be a really cool way to do it, and plus it's hella fun, right? You can, like you say, you can change a character in a video game. How cool is that, right? Or you can add a new. What was he doing? He was like adding new levels to this funny. It was like a walkthrough at Zelda-like game, and he was like just adding a whole new map to it because at that point you can. It was just really fun. I think this game, like I said, it ends up in not just memory problems lead to code execution, but it ends up in return-oriented programming, and that is hard work, frankly. So maybe don't start with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, but now that the work's been done, you can check it out on GitHub for yourself and see how it was done. So I think that's pretty useful too. Why not games as an intro hacker program? Sure. Yeah.
Okay, first up for me, building AI models to diagnose HVAC issues. This one comes to us from Kutlahan Akhtar, and the work here is aimed at making it easier to figure out what's going on with HVAC systems. Sometimes those are difficult problems to diagnose unless you have that specialist knowledge and you've put a lot of hours into listening and observing and fixing these things. The model that he's building is based on a hydronic system, so it's kind of the water-filled baseboards that are heated by like a gas-fired boiler or an oil-fired boiler, something like that. So it's pretty limited as far as what the kinds of systems that can be diagnosed. However, those are systems that are fairly expressive in their problems. They make a lot of noise, in other words. And if they tend to pick up leaks and stuff like that too, that tends to be very obvious. So it's a good place to start if you've got something that has kind of a lot of signal and very little noise compared to other kinds of systems like electric baseboards, which are silent and either work or don't work. There wouldn't be much modeling that you could do. Basically what he's doing here is he's building a model of an HVAC system so he can AI model what kinds of signals you would be getting out of them. Like I said, audibles, thermal imaging sort of problems, things like that. I see the value of that. I'm wondering how it's going to scale up to a full house-sized or building-sized system, but I understand the intent here is start small and work up from there. I think it's pretty cool. It kind of reminds me of that old joke about someone calling a repairman for a noisy appliance or something like that. The repairman shows up and listens to it for a second, takes out a hammer out of his bag and smacks it, and the sound stops, and hands the homeowner a bill for $500. $500? That's outrageous. What are you thinking of? All you did was hit it with a hammer. Rewrites the bill and itemizes it and says, hammer hitting, $1. Knowing where to hit, $4.99. And
Right.
that's kind of what this is. An experienced HVAC tech can come in and listen to a problem and say, squeaky belts, bad bearing in a fan unit. There's gurgling, so there might be air in the system. There's a zone pump that's making noise. And all those things are very difficult to teach someone and very difficult to accurately relay to someone. You've all seen the car commercials where someone is saying, "Oh, or the car repair commercials. Oh, car's making a noise. What's it sound like?" And you're like, whatever. They're making these ridiculous noises, trying to imitate what the car is doing. But a mechanic who gets in a car and drives it and says, it's a wheel bearing, driver's side or whatever, or that's, you can hear what's going on in an engine, in bearings and things like that. And getting that kind of information all modeled together so that something could listen and diagnose a problem would be, a huge benefit for not only HVACs, but also for cars, you could even diagnose computer problems by listening to fan noises and things like that. So I think this is kind of a rich vein to mine, and I'm glad that we're seeing some uses of AI that are starting to be more practical.
And it is something we see quite frequently on Hackaday, where people model bigger plants of one size kind of another, like whether it's an actual manufacturing plant or whether it's some kind of household thing like this, and just play with it and try to get a feel for it. And I really like that. I think it's a great idea to, build a desktop model that you can screw around with so that you don't break the real thing, which maybe is too expensive.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's nice about this is the model HVAC system. You can control it to introduce, known faults, whereas you might not want to do that on your household system. This is what a leak looks like. Well, yeah, okay, thanks a lot. Now replace the carpets.
And this is what you look like with buckets. Yeah. Well, my next hack is a video from Jeremy Fielding inside the Mecanum wheel. And these are just so fun. I don't know. I love the crazy wheels, both this one and what the heck's the name of the other strange wheel? The Omni wheel.
Omni wheel, yeah.
And they're really awesome because they don't work like normal wheels. The Mecanum wheel, if you don't know, is basically a bunch of rollers at 45 degrees to the way you'd normally expect the tread to go on a wheel. And it's a wheel made up of these 45-degree angled rollers. And as Jeremy demonstrates beautifully in this video, if you just turn one of them, it kind of wants to go at this 45-degree angle. But the trick is then to pair them together. So if you have one that's pointing 45 degrees in and the other that's 45 degrees in from the other side, the kind of opposing inward vectors cancel each other out, and you're just left with the forward motion. But then you can also cancel out the forward-backward part of it, and et cetera, et cetera. And by doing kind of clever vector math and having four of these things arranged in the right way, you can make a car that spins on its axis, or a car that moves sideways as well as it moves forwards, and et cetera, et cetera. Omni wheels are like this too, but Mecanum wheels are simpler and more robust in a bunch of ways, and end up being the ones that kind of get used more in big industrial machinery. And his example here for where you'll see these in the real world is in forklifts and kind of robots that are meant to carry things around warehouses and stuff, where this ability to go forwards and backwards, and then go directly to go crabbing sideways without having a turning radius is tremendously useful. This video it's a little bit long, but if you haven't seen Mecanum wheels before and you haven't seen how they work in particular, it's an absolutely lovely explainer. And I've always loved Jeremy Fielding's videos. Like, even when I know the material, I really like to watch his videos because he does such a great job of explaining them. Actually, someone on our Discord server was saying, who is the electronics world's Mr. Rogers. Who's the most soothing video out there? Someone else nominated Jeremy Fielding for it. I have to agree. Not electronics, maybe in robotics. It's a really lovely ode to the Mecanum wheel. And I think he's eventually planning a small, kind of desktop-sized robotics platform based on this. And this is his first shot across the bow on that. But that's kind of the second part of the story. Go check it out for the Mecanum wheels.
I've always wondered about, the actual real-world robustness of a Mecanum. First of all, would you want to make a passenger vehicle based on them? I think they would shake your fillings out of your head if you
right.
And you're going along. You'd have to have a hell of a suspension. Plus, the rollers themselves, they always seem to be a hard to semi-hard polymer of some sort. Either they're a hard nylon or like a rubber or something like that. And you can even see in the thumbnail for Jeremy's video, there's some pitting and wear on the rollers on the Mecanum that he's got there. And I think he was just pretty much running that around a piece of plexiglass in his workshop. So it was far from a real world environment with gravel and dirt and rocks and sawdust and all that stuff. So I always wonder about the robustness of them. But, it's one of those things where you could engineer that away to some degree. Material science is, a whole lot more advanced than when the Mecanum wheels were first invented, whenever that was. I have a feeling that they're pretty old, right? Wasn't that like 1950s or something like that?
Elliot goes off to Wikipedia.
I feel like they're old.
Patented November 13th, 1972.
Okay, so not that old. But still, material science has come a long way since 1972. So maybe there is a material that would hold up better.
Jeremy does mention that in this video. He talks about some of the pros and cons, and one of them is the expense, right? It's a hell of a lot more expensive than just making a regular rubber wheel. He actually didn't mention the suspension issue that you did. That's a good call. They're less efficient because you've got all those little bearings instead of some big ones. They rely on ideal flooring. So if you have kind of big gaps and stuff, they're not good at going over those because you get a part of the wheel rotating that you don't want. And finally, because you're counting on the two wheels offsetting each other, if there's any extra slip on one side or the other, it can make it travel not straight. And so, you're used to a car going in exactly the direction you pointed in. But if your Mecanum loses a little traction on the left side, it'll drift off to the left at this uncanny angle, right? That's kind of the opposite of the awesome crab walk. This is the not so awesome crab walk. And so there's kind of a location precision problem here too that he says is actually a problem with Mecanum wheeled robots in the real world. He suggests that that's actually an interesting problem. And if you're doing the mapping on the robot in other ways, you can kind of account for that. You can't just go dead reckoning with Mecanum wheels because they slip funny and unpredictably. And so you have to have some kind of feedback to say, am I bumping into this? Am I at the right angle here? Et cetera, et cetera. And so he kind of goes through that in the video and says, yeah, but these are all things you kind of have to design around. If you're looking for something that, can work inside on good known floors, then it's a pretty cool way to do it. And I think that's basically what he's aiming at here is, again, it's a small bot for playing around inside the home.
Yeah, and I kind of disagree on the Mr. Rogers thing. I'd say he's more like the Bob Ross.
Ooh, good. I'll take that.
He's got the happy little trees kind of vibe. So happy little wheels.
Happy little wheels.
Okay, next up for me, laser fault injection on the cheap. We've been seeing this kind of teased a little bit over the last couple of weeks. And that there was some new cheap way of doing laser fault injection on chips that was going to be released, and never really caught any technical details until finally we got a tip and found out what is actually going on here. This is from cybersecurity group in Finland called Fractal, and they have come up with a DIY fault injection using lasers that you can do for about $500. Fault injection, we've covered a lot of that recently, including a Pico EMP, so an electromagnetic pulse generating dongle that basically is scanning it over a chip in very precise increments and shooting pulses of EMI basically into the chip and seeing what happens is the basic process. So doing a sort of an XYZ scan over the chip and recording the results of each pulse that goes out. And when you find some place where the chip glitches itself, restarts, does something like that, then you may have a way into that chip using this EMP probe. Laser fault injection, same basic principle, except instead of stimulating the chip with RF energy, you're stimulating it with light. And that seems to be something that you wouldn't be able to do very affordably because it's lasers, it's optics, it's precisely moving a laser beam around. It's got a lot of complex moving parts. You figure that's something that it's only going to be, you're going to see like in the labs of the CIA or NSA or something like that for breaking into chips. But it ends up being actually not that expensive to throw together a working system that does this. The optics are all pretty well characterized and available from the usual sources, eBay and stuff like that. Instead of moving the chip, they've decided to move the laser beam. So that's the work of a galvanometer, the same kind of galvanometer that's used like in a laser light show, basically. So precisely moving the laser beam around in 2 dimensions using like voice coil attached to a mirror, that sort of thing. The problem is you got to get into the chip, and that's actually not that much of a problem because, of course, it's a destructive process. There's no two ways about that. You got to get past that epoxy. What they've done to make that a little less fussy, like you can do like nitric acid to get the epoxy off of a chip. That's pretty well characterized too, but it's a little bit out of the ballpark for a lot of people. Don't want to be flinging around noxious chemicals like that. So what they've done is developed a procedure for milling out the epoxy, but they do it from the backside of the lead frame. So what they're exposing is the underside of the original silicon die, which is less sensitive. All the good stuff, all the etching stuff, all the components really are on the top of the chip. The back of the chip is just a bare piece of silicon. So if you get rid of the epoxy and you expose the backside, you can actually just shine the laser right through it. It's silicon. It's clear, basically. It's glass, kind of. And the laser can shine through, and then the galvanometer can do its thing, scan XY, and then shoot the IR laser. I think it was like 1045 nanometers or something like that. And then search for places on that chip that the laser induces a fault. And then that's maybe a place that you can concentrate on attacking. You can reset the chip and maybe interrupt a boot cycle or something like that. And you can use that as the basis for an exploit. So anyways, I thought this was really cool. I really liked the idea that it's that they're trying to bring these kinds of attacks down into the range where just regular people can throw together a rig to do this and get maybe some interesting results. And it also brings up the point that it's not such an exotic attack anymore if you can do it for $500. If someone can do it for $500, it's probably something you need to think about when you're designing security for a system. That's just something to keep in mind. It's not security by obscurity anymore when you can do it for $500.
It's fun. In their write-up, they mentioned the Chip Whisperer, which was Colin O'Flynn's attempt to make power glitching obvious and repeatable and easy for the hacker crowd. And I think that's like, this is kind of the next step in like our leveling up our state of the art, because with power glitching, you're just kind of browning out the chip at just the right time. And with laser, you're pointing at the right part of the chip and hitting it at the right time. And so it's a lot more precise in a way.
Yeah. More directed.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if you know enough that that's helpful to you, it can help you get the glitch across faster. And, if you don't, you just have to scan the whole thing, which is kind of fun about this because he is using a reasonably fast little laser galvo nice fancy lens to back it up. So, he can scan across the whole die space pretty quickly. That's also kind of the limitation of this, is that it's it's $130 hobby Galvo. It's meant for doing not the world's most fanciest laser projection shows, right? It's for fun. These cheap Chinese Galvos are for fun. They're really awesome and they're super fun, but it's not the most precise thing in the universe. And I love the comment from Fractal. In all fairness, our rig is probably by far the least precise LFI rig to ever exist, yet it still works and it allows us to do all the things we ever wanted to do. And that, I think, is really the point here. It's not the fanciest, the most high tech. In fact, it's probably, about $500 worth of equipment.
This isn't what the NSA is using to break into your phone.
Exactly. But if it gets the job done, that's what you need. And if it lets you play around with this technique, that's what you need. And, if it lets you get the foot in the door and it lets, a whole bunch more people get their feet in the door, which is really what lowering the price and making a simpler version of things does. It enables a whole bunch of people to start using a technique that used to be limited to, a couple wizards locked behind the expensive money doors. So I think it's really awesome, and I think it's a really fun technique, and I want to see what people start doing with this.
Yeah, and the other way to go that it'd probably be worth looking at is, instead of moving the laser, instead of doing the galvanometer, which, like you said, is not necessarily the most precise thing. It's made for doing, cheapo laser light shows. Maybe do something like actually moving the chip, maybe nano positioning the chip. And it just so happens that we know someone who builds nano positioning rigs on the very cheap. And we did a hack chat on that. Name is Inte Wu. And he came on. Remember, he came on and did the that whole thing about nano positioning, and they're very low cost units that he builds, and he's getting super precision movement over a very small scale, which sounds exactly like you want to do here. So instead of moving the laser, keep the laser absolutely fixed, and then move the chip a little bit. And you have to worry about inducing shake and motion and all that stuff. You'd probably have to use an optical table. So now you're probably talking about more expensive stuff, but still, it seems like it could be approachable and something that is probably worth investigation too.
Yeah, and I think you're also limited by laser spot size here. Like you have to, the minimum resolution is probably determined by laser spot size in the system, I guess. I talked bad about those cheap Galvos, but they actually aren't bad. They get you probably 16-bit resolution from side to side. So that's a lot of little points across the size of a chip. And maybe actually given that the laser is the limit. I don't know. But again, this is a great first step. And I think your idea of adding, moving stage to the bottom could totally let you tweak things when you're in the right neighborhood. It might be really cool to let you tweak things and test it out that way. My last hack this week, Tulip, is a MicroPython synth workstation in ESP32. I have a weakness for fun synthesizers, and this one of Brian Whitman's is an amazing piece of work. I think he's been working at this behind the scenes for at least a couple years now, and it's kind of the culmination of a bunch of different separate projects that he's been working on, so it's a do-everything device, and I really like that. And it runs on an ESP32, which is pretty sweet. Well, it's an ESP32 S3. It's one of the newer, faster ones, Who's complaining at this point? And what he's got here is a very capable synthesizer engine running in MicroPython and with this really neat kind of live coding operating system almost that he has worked out. And it responds to and sends MIDI, and it can actually use the GPIOs from the ESP32 when you get into the hardware side of things. But even just on the music side of things, you can essentially just plug a keyboard into this device. You can build it with a touchscreen or a display if you want to. You can plug a keyboard, a typey keyboard into it, as well as a musical keyboard. And you can say, run the synthesizer, and then you can be playing it like it was a synthesizer on the piano keyboard. Or you can say, run this as a subroutine and play this note for a quarter note every so often. and run that code in the background. Big overview, it's got a bunch of cool synthesizer engines, it's got a sequencer, it's got a drum machine. And so it's got kind of all the components of, maybe a late 80s, early 90s, fully stocked synthesizer studio at your fingertips, which I think is really cool. But what I really like about it is the kind of MicroPython back end and how that all works because I like code and I like music. And this puts them together. And I've always liked the kind of idea of live coding music and playing around with randomness and generative music and things like that. And this seems to be a really neat direction to go with that because it's extremely small, extremely cheap, it's extremely portable. If you hook it up with USB-C, it just plugs into everything. He's getting these made by Makerfabs and selling them for outrageously cheap. So if you want to support the creator of these, you could probably pick up your Tulip from Makerfabs. It's like $60. I think the touchscreen alone, if you had to buy it, is like $50. So you're not gonna beat this. He must have a volume discount on him. It seems awesome. Audio comes out by I2S, so it actually sounds good. He's got some hacks to port it to a whole bunch of different devices. It works on your desktop computer, so if you just want to play around with the live coding aspects of it, you can run the MicroPython environment on your desktop computer, although right now it seems to be having problems with Arch Linux, which is actually me, and it's bumming me out, so I had to run it on my old laptop that still has the Ubuntu system on it, but works fine there. He is a Mac coder and probably needs some help on the Linux side, so if awesome crazy programmable synthesizers is your gig, check out Tulip and maybe you can help him with the Linux side of things too.
Should have known you were going to pick this one. It's got synths in it, so it's,
Dude, I've downloaded it and played it. It's awesome.
There you go.
Like, I didn't just write this up for Hackaday. I wasted a good 3 hours playing around with it. Quick shout out to a couple other live codable synthesizer coding mashups. One is Diddy Toy, which runs in your browser in JavaScript. We covered that back in last year. Generative music created in minimalist JavaScript code. That's really cool. And kind of the great granddaddy of all these, still running, the Sonic Pi project. Barry H. Priest brought this up in the comments, and Sonic Pi is it's its own kind of programming language running on the Raspberry Pi, but it's aimed at kind of live coding musical performances. So really pretty cool. And there's a huge community based around people, well, huge for the scale of these things. There's a large community of people working on Sonic Pi. So if you want to check that out, definitely worth your time. But if you want something hardware that you can slip in your back pocket, connect to any USB keyboard, whether Type-E or black and white keys keyboard, give Tulip a check. It's really, really sweet. I've played with it. Gets the seal of approval.
All right, last up for me is the waveguide explanation you wish you'd had at school. Now, I saw this one pop up, and I didn't know how to write it up, really. This is from Old Hack EE. It's a video that basically covers everything you ever wanted to know about waveguides at a non-mathy sort of level. Waveguides are easy, quote-unquote easy, to describe with math, but the physical concepts and why they work doesn't make any sense. If you're not versed, if you haven't been introduced to waveguides, you could watch this video and understand instantly what they are and what they do. But basically, they're pipes for radio frequency energy, particularly for high frequency waves like microwaves. And they're very cool because I've always been fascinated by things that just work based on their shape and their size and don't have any kind of active components or anything else in them. I guess you could argue that they are active components in a way, but anyways, waveguides work because of the skin effect, which is the tendency for high frequency waves to travel in the outside layers of a conductor. So basically a waveguide is like a hollow wire. You basically take everything away that the radio waves aren't going to travel through anyways and just leave an empty space. there's more to it than that. That was sort of the level of understanding of waveguides that I had before watching this level. Now I understand why they're the shape that they are, why they work, and as a bonus, I also understand things like quarter wave stubs on antennas that look like they would be a direct short to ground, and they would be if you measured it with a multimeter or something like that because it's DC. But at radio frequencies, that's not a short circuit because you've got a quarter wavelength between one end and the other, and the signal will reflect off of it and basically cancel itself out. So it looks like an open circuit at the frequency it's designed for. All that kind of stuff adds up. He kind of builds on that basic concept and then shows you that the outside of a waveguide, the rectangular form of it, can be thought of as a series of quarter wave stubs that form a channel. That one fact alone sort of opened my eyes to how waveguides work, and I really enjoyed this video. It certainly doesn't cover the math, like I said, of waveguides. There's certainly much more to waveguides than this video presents. But if you want to understand a little bit about how these components work, this is the place for you to go. He also talks about things like splitters and feeds and couplers, all these kind of things that make much more sense to me now that I've seen this video than they did before. And I think that's a great service that he's performed here, in just a very simple, I think it was only like 20 or 30 minutes long, but very detailed and kind of with a little bit of a Mr. Rogers / Bob Ross kind of vibe going here too. This is very both soothing and engaging at the same time. So if you've had any waveguide questions, you might want to start here.
I don't think I have.
You don't have any waveguide questions.
I don't have any waveguide questions. I also didn't get to watch the videos, but now I have to go watch the video.
Now you got to go watch it because it's very interesting. And
damn it. But I don't need any waveguides.
Don't you though?
Convincing me I'm wrong.
Think of all the waveguides around you.
The problem is I do need knowledge, and I'm probably willing to watch it just for that. Damn it. My first quick hack this week comes from Jason. It's a cheap DIY button pad, uses neat punch card trick. He wants to make something that's basically like a Stream Deck, where you have different icons underneath each key, and they can all be in different colors. And he does that by using, of course, WS2812 LEDs underneath, but then an overlay card that he slips in to do the graphics. But the really cool trick here is that he has 3 different light sensors, and he punches out one of 8 possible different hole patterns in there that lets the pad know which of the overlay cards you've just slipped in, so it can change the colors accordingly, it can change some of its functions, you can program them. All sorts of really fun functions are enabled just by this really stupid, simple mechanism where he's got, it's like reading punch tape. He's got a sensor and a light underneath it. That's a really, really fun application here. Next up, Ben, RC submarine builds start with plenty of research, and that's the truth. Submarines are harder to build than you think. This one, he thought it was going to be kind of a foot-long submarine, and it ended up being 4 feet long and gigantic. What he found out is what I found out the one time I tried to make a sub, which is the rising and sinking is the hardest part. And so you can either pump air and water in and out, but then you need a snorkel, you can compress it, or you can use thrusters, or you can do what he does here, which I think is novel. He actually uses pumps that can run in both directions, kind of in place of thrusters. And so he pumps water and it makes like a fountain, and that pushes it downward. Just a really sweet and simple way to make a small RC submarine build. And last up, Heinbach. Speaking of my synthesizer problem, moon bounce music. I suspect this started off as a joke based on the Roland Space Echo, and it got totally out of control. He managed to find himself an old radio telescope and get the help of its operator sends audio samples to the moon and back, and then makes a plugin that kind of mangles the sound in the way the moon bounced equivalents would have. It's a fun video. Well, I don't know if it's as fun for the music as it is for the kind of ham radio moon bounce tricks where sending radio signals off the moon and back.
My first quick hack is Proxxon CNC conversion makes a small mill a bit bigger. This is from Dira Venkatraman, and I'm guessing that these Proxxon mini mills are more popular in Europe and Asia than they are here. You don't see them that much in the US, but they look really nice, and I think they sort of have saturated like the watchmaking and precision machining market. However, there's a few things about them that don't quite add up, particularly the y-axis travel. Dira managed to make, with 3D printed CNC modifications, he managed to add 15 extra millimeters of headroom on the z-axis and basically double the y-axis travel, make this much more useful and much more CNC-y. Next up, magnesium and copper makes an emergency flashlight. Now, my family thinks I'm weird because I don't leave batteries in the flashlights, at least the ones in the car that don't get used that often. I think it makes sense because every time I leave batteries in a flashlight, they just end up a gooey mess. This is a dry flashlight, basically. It's got magnesium and copper as the two electrodes, the anode and the cathode. In the middle of it, it's got just cotton fluff that's stuffed in there, and when you need to light up the LED that's attached to the cap, all you need to do is add some water. You're not going to get much light out of it, obviously, but it's better than nothing, and you store the batteries dry, just like they do in torpedoes and other applications where you're looking for long life. And last up, a tiny knob keeps you in control. Just wanted to mention this one as a hats off to Jenny, who wrote it up and managed not to crack up with the innuendo that only a British person would probably get on tiny knob. But it's also pretty cool. It's a little USB rotary encoder with an AT-Tiny 85 and not a whole lot else that you can use for pretty much anything. Use it as a volume control, or you could use it as a rotary encoder of some sort next to your keyboard. The sky's the limit with something like this.
It's time for our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I wanted to pick Arya Voranova's Audio on Pi. Here are your options. Man, I seem to be on an audio kick this show. What is going on?
Wow, how about that?
This one is an interesting dive into the various ways you can get audio out of a Raspberry Pi. And in particular, I guess she's thinking of the cheaper ones. Maybe you want to make your own music player, or maybe you need to have a robot that makes some noise or records some noise or whatever. The Raspberry Pi is awesome, except it doesn't have the world's best audio input and output. And this article is about how you can work around that. She does, of course, mention the Raspberry Pi's built-in audio, which is actually a really super high-frequency PWM software-driven audio. It's, the truth is, if you really just need something to make some noise, it's not so bad. But you have significantly better options out there. The one that she thinks is probably the easiest and most accessible is to just plug a USB sound card in there. I thought the interesting part was she really likes, whatever it is, the Apple $10 USB-C sound card. It's not even sold as a sound card. This is sold as because they stopped putting headphone jacks on Apple iPhones. They have to resort to basically a USB-C DAC and ADC to plug a real headphone into. She is proposing that you take this thing, and because the Pis don't have USB-C on them, you get a USB-C to USB Type-A adapter, and you buy one of these, and that's a great way to get an extremely high quality DAC for cheap on the Raspberry Pi. I think that's really sweet. She talks about Bluetooth, and that's great if you have an external powered Bluetooth speaker that you can bring into your project. And I know I've seen some people do that with their professional projects. Is, easy way to get audio out of the Pi is to just send it over magic radio waves to something that can receive them. And that works really well. The one that was the most surprising to me was sending it out over Ethernet. She basically says, well, you just, get a device that can receive it and play it remotely using that. I think that's pretty clever. And of course, the kind of, I don't know if it's the gold standard, but it's the hackeriest way to go is you actually just take the I2S data straight out of the Raspberry Pi and you put it into an I2S capable DAC or, translator chip and run it into your speaker that way. And that's actually my favorite way to play with audio on the Raspberry Pis. I2S is absolutely fantastic, and you can get multiple channels in and out, and depending on the little DAC chip that you use, you can get fidelity ranging from pretty amazing to really, really great. And, it's definitely the cheap way to go. I2S DACs, ADCs, and DACs with built-in amplifiers are available for the Raspberry Pi for a few bucks, or you can go all out and build your own, take it all very seriously, and get every last decibel of signal-to-noise ratio out of it. But it'll cost you a little bit of money.
I kind of think the most surprising one here to me, and one you don't really think of, is the HDMI audio. I mean, you've got two audio channels, I think, or maybe even more over HDMI. So why not take advantage of that? That one was a little bit of an eye opener to me. I mean, I've had this problem, just like everybody else, and just like Arya explained, you want to do a quick little project especially with ham radio, because Pis are great, extra computers for the ham Radio Shack. And if you want to do, digital modes of some sort, or whisper or something like that, then having the option to use a smaller computer rather than dedicate your main computer to doing things in the digital modes is handy. But there's the audio problem. You need to get the audio into the Pi to be able to do anything with this digital modes, and I've had that problem too. And it always seems to be a problem that I think of at the very last minute, like, oh, right, no audio inputs on this thing. Okay, now what do I do? And I rummage around and look for something, and I'm like, okay, I've got a little USB dongle or something like that. I didn't know that that Apple USB dongle existed. That's very interesting to me, and only $10. That doesn't seem very Apple-like.
Right?
But certainly something that's worth keeping in stock, especially, it does all the other stuff too that you would expect, like, the HID stuff. So if you're pushing buttons on your headset or something like that, you can, that might be a really useful feature for something. I don't know what, but, it's something to keep in mind.
Tons and tons of awesome audio projects you could do with a Pi, because it's a little computer. Audio these days is, video is the hard stuff for a Raspberry Pi. Doing video stuff will tax your Pi's memory and computational bandwidth, but audio won't at all these days. And, if something like the Tulip can do 128 voice synthesizer on an ESP32, like, what the Pi could do is unbelievable. And, multi-channel recording, playback, all sorts of stuff that used to be, difficult and expensive and would be super handy for your projects.
Okay, my can't miss pick is a sweep for Arya, because I chose portable router build, picking your CPU. A portable router is something that you could very easily see being useful. Sometimes you want to keep your data secure. Everybody's really carrying around a portable router in their pocket. Right now, you could turn on your hotspot and connect to a 5G or LTE network or whatever, and start up a Wi-Fi access point, and most of us have probably used that in some situations or another. I have. It's not optimal by any means. I know on my phone it just kills the battery, and the phone gets smoking hot sometimes. So not a great solution, but if you want to have a portable router, this is the series for you. It's the beginning of the series, and Arya's basically going through specs and goals for the project, what she's trying to accomplish, and making the basic choices of what is going to go into this router. Now, of course, a router is really nothing more than a computer that knows how to put packets from one place to another. Easy peasy. You could build a router out of just about anything. However, some computers are better suited to the job than others. And we were just talking about Raspberry Pis. Raspberry Pi was certainly a possibility for this project. Maybe not so much because they're sort of concentrated on kind of UI stuff, and their resources are not optimized for routing. But there are other computers that better fit the bill, and the one that she found is Onion Omega 2 Plus. Onion is only coincidental. It's not Tor, and the logo looks pretty similar. Maybe a little weird and seems a little misdirecting, but this is basically the guts of a router brought out onto a breakout board with everything brought out to pins and to make it easy to build with. Rather than coming with something like Raspbian or some Linux-based OS like that, it's ships with Open WRT, so it's you can see that it's kind of its bones are basically in the router sort of world. I think that's kind of cool. I never knew this thing existed. I guess she picked this up back in like 2018. But still, this project has been kind of back-burnering for a long time for her, and she's just getting it started up. She's got some neat tips about a modern breadboarding sort of technique where she's using just basically a piece of cardboard to lay out stuff and seeing if she can get it to fit in the physical package that she wants everything to be in, which is kind of a little zipper case that's very compact. Anyways, this is the beginning of a series. She's just kind of going through the spec process right now and trying to come up with the things that are going to go into this package. Kind of interested to see where this goes and what the software that ends up going on this thing will look like. Stay tuned for more on this one. I think this is going to be a good series.
Pointing out the cell phone is interesting. Can you attach multiple devices to your cell phone's hotspot, or does it just have to talk to one at a time?
I've done multiples. When we were traveling across the country, if the kids needed to get online, I would start up my phone as a hotspot, and then they'd all connect to it.
Can the devices attached to the hotspot talk to each other through it?
That's a good question.
I guess I'm trying to think about why I want one of these, and it's really interesting, like the idea of creating kind of a mobile real network, not I'm connecting to the internet through this device kind of gateway thing, but actually these devices on the network can talk to other devices on the network might be kind of cool. She's talking about getting like 20 hours of life out of this thing on two 18650 cells, so it's kind of neat in that respect too, where if you did that with your cell phone, you'd be out of juice in an hour or two, whereas this is something you could leave on all day until you go to sleep and then recharge it. That makes it kind of a different beast in a way, right? Like if it's always on and you don't have to think about it, worry about how long you can keep it on, et cetera, that's a different object as well. I don't know. I'm totally interested to see where this project goes, though.
I could see something like this being, a good emergency solution for just that kind of thing where all of a sudden everything's gone other than LTE or 5G, and just being able to get online quickly and worry about what's really going on later. I could see that being useful use case for this.
And a trick a friend of mine used to do was to do basically this, set up a router and then hook up a big hard drive to it and use it as a kind of on the go ad hoc walking around file sharing device, which is the kind of thing nerds are want to do. But I like that idea too, and I think that's a way this could be extended just for fun as well. That way you always got your gigantic library of files with you and hooked up to a network, and a network under your control. I think that's kind of fun too. That does it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to follow the links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And as always, if you see anything cool or do anything cool, shoot us a line, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
That was me, and that's you. See what happens.
HVAC. I'll start one more time.
Cheap DI Whattin. What are they called? They're called Stream Decks.
Okay, my first hit. This is how it's going to go.
I didn't describe that well at all. NSA is probably doing it to me already.
All right. We said enough?
Yeah, perfect, I think.